Welcome to both colleagues from the university and multiple visitors I can see, certainly in the audience. I'm Judith Batchelar, I'm the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Research and Enterprise at the university and extremely pleased to introduce and host this evening's event. This is actually the 7th annual lecture, supported by our great partners at the university, the Volatility Conservation Trust. I'm extremely grateful to their support and continuing support to us and engagement with the university in our research. And every year we've had rather impressive speakers, and this evening is no exception. We've had in the past John Billington when he was Chief Scientist. We've had Chris Packham, who is actually one of our honorary graduates as well. We've had Helen Phillips from Natural England. We've had Lord Bevan from the department, who was quite controversial actually from a university perspective when he was here, because he said something about energy consumption in this room, giving a lecture organised by the energy research group, and so we all had to go away and think about energy consumption in this room. I'm sure that our speaker this evening won't be so controversial in terms of the university. It's a great pleasure, therefore, to introduce our speaker, Judith Batchelar, from Sainsbury's. And Judith, unfortunately, didn't get into Southampton to a degree. She just owned up to it. Apparently, we weren't very pleasant in those days. And so she went to Surrey instead, but we don't hold it against her because it seems to have been our fault. And it's our fault that we lost out on someone who's clearly been extremely successful in her career. She's a biochemist and nutritionist, registered nutritionist. She looks after basically the whole of Sainsbury's product offer now, which is everything through from brand reputation, quality assurance, the whole production and ethical issues behind Sainsbury's products, and the entire agenda really from quality through innovation for Sainsbury's. Prior to the role at Sainsbury's, she's actually had a significant career with Safeway, and prior to that with Marks and Spencer. Safeway and more recently Marks and Spencer, most particularly working around health and well-being strategy for Marks and Spencer. She's also worked in manufacturing in the food sector, both for Mars and for Bass. She sits on the Board of Trustees for the Marine Stewardship Council and Farm Africa. She is also an ambassador for the Woodland Trust and co-chairs the government's Leadership Council, working on the implementation of the Agritech strategy. So I think you can see that from her own background, her significant experience in the food and food-related industry, and particularly in the retail sector of that industry, and now in the national roles that she plays. She has a very important input to food strategy, but also a very important and breadth of input to that strategy, which is extremely valuable to us and to the UK. So I'm extremely pleased to welcome Judith and to ask her to deliver her lecture, Emerging Environmental Opportunities. Yes, it is on the screen.
I say good evening, it's not quite, but thank you very much for inviting me to speak. And thank you also to Vitacress. I've spent over 30 years now working in the food and drink industry, and I think for about 20 years of those with Vitacress, so working alongside them. So I want to thank you for your support too, and for being here this evening. As already said, I work for Sainsbury's. I'm responsible for a team of about 250 people who look after all of the products that we sell with our name on them. And whilst we are a UK retailer, we are actually a global business, because although we have over 1,000 stores in the UK, we source from over 72 countries in the world, 12,500 products, 4,500 supplying sites, tens of thousands of farmers, particularly if you include smallholder farmers in Africa, supplying us with tea and coffee. And we manage all of that mostly incident-free. So we're very pleased of our track record. But clearly, as a business, we have our own operations in the UK, which are relatively easy for us to manage. But our biggest footprint as a business is our global footprint through the products that we source and the supply chains that we source from. So one of the things that I'm going to focus on today is talking about how we go about that, some of the challenges that we've got and what we're doing about it. So the challenges. We've got challenges of emerging technology, and even if I go back 10 years, it was very easy to be seduced by things that were great in theory, but we couldn't, in a practical commercial environment, put into practice for a number of reasons. However, those emerging technologies, as you'll hear in a minute, are becoming more accessible and cheaper, and therefore we can be seduced by some of those new technologies. The question is which ones. We have the challenge of sustainable intensification, which again I will talk about, and the fact that we believe that only an interdisciplinary approach to some of these things is going to solve some of those challenges. And the other thing is we want to have a positive impact as a retailer, not just a positive impact on the health and well-being of the 25 million customers that we serve each week in our stores, which we do, and we work hard at that, but also a positive impact on the communities from which we source and the environment around those communities. So those are the challenges. You all know this because you'll have had John Beddington tell you about this. In 2009, he talked about the perfect storm and the fact that we need more food, we need more energy, and we need more water. And if that weren't a big enough challenge, and the challenge of a growing population, we're doing that with the background of climate change. And there was a very real need, and there still is, because we're not doing that well at it, a very real need to maintain global warming to within about 2 degrees, to mitigate, to achieve 2-degree warming, so that we can buy ourselves the time to adapt to a new climate. So we've got a very complex agenda. None of those things are insular, they are all interdependent. So we have to make trade-offs because we can't optimise everything, and that's difficult because making trade-offs is never easy, and some of that requires judgment. And of course the science, as we know it, is evolving all the time. So with that background, we've got the challenge of feeding a £10 billion population with that background, and only, I believe, and I do believe this, science and technology, but science and technology combined with skills to interpret that science and technology and to convert that knowledge into commercial and active environments. But the reality is we live in a very fragile food system, or with a very fragile food system. So there is only about 39 days of food on the planet. And most of that is probably in a container ship on the sea somewhere, moving around as it gets distributed. And it doesn't take very much to disrupt that. So it doesn't take much when Russia decides that they are going to stop exporting wheat and they're going to stop importing anything from the EU to disrupt all of that. You'll remember back to the food riots in 2008 when people died because wheat prices were disrupted and people went hungry. And one of the things that we need to do is to make those value chains less volatile. We need to smooth out that supply and demand and basically create a more secure and resilient food system in all sorts of ways. And clearly we also have a food system that is not equal in the way that food is currently distributed. And perhaps we can talk about that later. But having said all of that, up until now, and very recently, the climate that all of that has happened in has been extremely stable. But you all know, and some of you I know sitting here have experienced this firsthand, extreme weather is now a thing of the norm. And if you look at climate change moves on averages. And the averages look okay if you look at them over a long period of time. But what is increasing is the spread of weather. So whilst the average is moving slowly, the spread is much wider and moving much faster, so those extremes. And if you look in America last year, something like 80% of the weather stations across the whole of North America recorded at least one world record in terms of extreme weather, whether that was rainfall, humidity, temperature, snowfall, those kind of things, which basically tells you what the trend is going. With also that backdrop, the UK has lagged behind other countries in terms of agricultural productivity. So whilst the rest of the world has been embracing biotechnology, has been embracing the use of agrochemicals and all the things that we've been probably a little bit more circumspect with, we have basically managed to produce a lot more food per capita. And as I say, we haven't necessarily moved at the same pace as the rest of the world, and say a bit more circumspect, but basically we are producing more food, and we've got a pretty good track record globally of producing more food. But that comes with an environmental price tag attached to it. So we're already using 40% of ice-free land for agriculture, and most of the land that can be used is being used. And that includes the land that we have ploughed up, grasslands, so it's not just the rainforest, but the savannas of South America, and we've cut down rainforests. And we all know what the downside of all of that is, and we can't continue to do it anymore. So we need to be a lot cleverer. But although the UK has lagged behind, and although I've just given you all this doom and gloom, actually I do feel pretty optimistic about this. And I feel optimistic about it and the UK in particular because we have a fantastic world-class research base. And I can say that standing here because this afternoon I have just listened to some very interesting work that's going on here, obviously with watercress and other salad leaves. But we actually do bat well above our weight in terms of research. So we only have 1% of the world's population. We only have 3% of global funding in terms of research, but actually we have 15% of the world's most cited scientific papers. So we should all sit here and feel proud that we do have a world-class research base. The question is, have we got the skills to optimise that? Government thinks we have, so government has put money into basically what they're calling the 8 great technologies. Since they did this 8 great technologies, they've added another 2, but it doesn't quite sound right, so the 10 great technologies. But these are the things that the UK is world class at. So if you combine the research base and the 8 great technologies, the opportunities for us with the government funding that has gone into some of these things are immense. So whether that's big data, satellites, robotics, synthetic biology, etc., and the one that I'm involved with is just agri-science. So again, reasons to feel pleased that we're putting our priorities in the right place. So if you look at that challenge, 10 billion people to feed sustainably and with a positive impact, then basically there are 5 priorities. The first one is to reduce waste, because actually, if we just reduce the waste, and I'll talk about this in a minute, we would be halfway to feeding everybody. Increasing productivity and yields goes without saying, and I say the UK has lagged behind, but not at any cost. And not at any cost, particularly if you look at things like plant, animal and human nutrition, which we now know are inextricably linked. So healthy plants, healthy animals, healthy human beings, and a healthy planet and healthy soil to go with it. We'll do that by embracing science and technology, but as I've said, only if we have the skills and the capacity to make the most of that scientific research. So food waste, the first one of those priorities. It's actually a global issue. Everyone wastes food, they just waste it in different ways. In North America, they waste more food than anyone else, and in Europe, we're second place. And what this shows here, the red box is consumer waste, and the grey box is basically food waste that occurs in the value chain. So this is pre and post harvest. And what you can see is that overall, consumer waste is the challenge in the developed world. This all makes sense. And in the developing countries, they waste very little. but they use a huge amount in terms of pre and post harvest because they just don't either have good agricultural practice in the first place and the right interventions from a crop health particularly point of view, and the right storage conditions, with all sorts of things like aflatoxins, mycotoxins that literally destroy crops. So it is a global issue and we need to do something about it. And I suppose the point I wanted to make is it's not just about not wasting food. The more criminal thing is the waste of the inputs and the resources that have gone into that. So if you look at the UK, and bread is one of the most highly wasted food commodities. 32% of all edible bread is wasted, goes stale, gets thrown away. But if you take every pound of bread, pound cash value of bread that is thrown away, there is £6 worth of waste in the value chain that sits behind it of the resources that went into making that bread. And that is the real issue, not just the bread that we throw away. Because if you look at that chart there, what you can see here is the carbon footprint and the contribution to a loaf of bread. And raw materials is basically the agricultural part of the supply chain. And bread's actually quite good. Most supply chains, 50% of the footprint is in the agricultural part of it. So all the inputs that went into making that wheat to mill into flour to produce that bread. Then the second biggest bit obviously is the consumer waste, so the 32% that gets thrown away, and waste management throughout the chain. If you think about that, that is a huge waste of the Earth's resources, and particularly when you think that some of the resources that have gone into producing that bread are finite. And we've been doing some work basically looking on fertiliser use in wheat and contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. And I won't read all through it, but basically, if you look at that 41%, 45% of that is the cost of nitrogen fertiliser. So if you would say, where would I like to put my efforts in terms of reducing the waste on wheat, then I would focus my efforts on nitrogen fertiliser application. Now, here you could get into real blue sky research, so you could think about creating wheat that is nitrogen fixing, and actually people are working on those kind of things as we speak. But there are some things that are much nearer market that we as a retailer could take that research and science and put it into a practical situation to say, how can we reduce nitrogen fertiliser use and in the production of wheat and flour for our bread in our in-store bakeries. And we've already started that. We've got a project that's been running for a while called Wheat Scan, and basically this looks at precision agriculture, and that's nothing new. It's with us, not with all our farmers, but our enlightened farmers are using GPS technology to use precision application of things like fertilisers, insecticides, etc., etc. We can make that even more precise by using imaging from drones that fly over fields, looking at various things. So whether that's soil health, whether that's dry patches, whether that's on what we think looks like unhealthy growth in the field. And we can do that with drones. We can also do that with satellites. And when we've looked at that, and we've done some work on that, what we found was that if we compared those GPS and all of that intelligence with the actual levels of nitrogen in the field, there was some correlation, but there wasn't a huge correlation. So measuring those things wasn't a proxy for protein in nitrogen in the field or protein in the wheat. The only way to do that was to actually measure the protein in the wheat when it was growing. And at the moment we do that in a lab, so we take the samples, go off and measure it. But by that time, the tractor's been up and down the field a couple of times anyway, and they've probably put that second dose of nitrogen fertiliser on. When we looked at that, I said, second dose of nitrogen fertiliser in 60% of cases wasn't required in order to get protein levels in the wheat to a level that we could create flour that we could bake bread with. so British wheat for baking British loaves. So the second part of the project, which is moving on now, which is an Agritech Catalyst Fund project, proud to say, is with us, our growers Camgrain, Manchester University and ADAS, which basically is a tractor-mounted sensor that actually looks at the protein in the wheat as the tractor goes through the field. So real time, we can then see what's happening in the field as the wheat is growing, and then apply the nitrogen fertiliser. And we believe that we will save up to half of the nitrogen fertiliser, and particularly that late application of nitrogen fertiliser, therefore reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And the reason I say that is because that is happening now. So this work, this trial, this science application, and it's only working because the end-to-end value chain is working together. So our growers, knowing that they can indulge in this research that's funded by the government, working with the researchers and academic establishments and ADAS, but we are providing a market for that wheat and a guaranteed market. And when you join all of those things up, it's hugely powerful, and you can move at pace, because we will have the answers to this by the end of this year. And the total life cycle of that project will have been 4 years from start to finish. And of course, doing that will help us to improve productivity and yields and help us to build resilience. And this graph just basically shows the volatility of wheat prices. So what you've got here is 2003 to 4. Here you've got this peak which caused the food riots, and again, very volatile. Actually, the UK should be pretty resilient to this, because we produce more than enough wheat that we need. Not always necessarily of the right quality, but we are pretty much net exporters of wheat, or have been up until fairly recently. So if we can grow wheat of the right quality to bake bread or cakes or biscuits, or wheat for animal feed or whatever else we might be doing, then in theory we can build a level of resilience for the UK that will remove that volatility. Of course, I am not going to touch on this at all this evening. That doesn't take into account what happens with quotas, tariffs, and the kind of trade barriers that people put up globally that distort the entire market. That's probably another topic. So, wasting less of the Earth's resources, using those resources wisely. The second one is about sustainable intensification. And we've had a dairy development group that's been working together since 2007, and we know that basically the best 10% of farmers, and there are 310 of them who produce 500 million litres of milk that we sell each year, use 11% less feed to produce 47% more milk. And you don't have to work out that if you could just get the bottom 10% up to the average, and if you could get the average to the top 10%, in terms of sustainable intensification, we would be doing a good job, but only if that's done in the right way. And the reason we know that, and the reason we've been able to work on that for the last 8 years, is because of the knowledge that we have, because we have been collecting huge amounts of data from those farmers. Huge amounts of data, for example, on animal health. So we look at things like metabolic syndromes, disease, we look at mastitis, we look at lameness, we intervene with veterinary advice that we pay for when those dairy farmers need help with those things. And because we have got healthier dairy cows, healthier than the national average, we know that those cows produce 140 litres a head more of milk than the national average. And that's just one aspect of the things that we would look at. But clearly, that's all about knowledge. And one of the scary things that we have at the moment is that we have the haves and have-nots of data and knowledge. And if you are the haves and you are part of a group that shares that information, you have that data. So all of our dairy farmers will be benchmarked against their peer group on a number of metrics. They know what the top 10% is, the bottom 10%, they know where they sit on the average, and then they are red, amber, green rated. It's all anonymous, but they're then given advice about what to do, and whether that's about investment in renewable energy, whether that's about tree planting, whether that's about slurry management, all sorts of things, to enable them to be more productive and more efficient. But why I put this slide up here is because I think sustainable intensification is all about knowledge intensification. So the more knowledge that we have about a field, an animal, a herd, a flock, the more information that we have, the better the decisions we will make about all of that. And that's why one of the first parts of the Agritech strategy was to set up the Agri-Informatics and Sustainability Metrics Centre as the first centre, to make sure that all of that data can be shared in a pre-competitive way, so that you don't end up with the haves and have-nots in terms of data and knowledge, and particularly insight. And I suppose this has happened because data is becoming cheaper, faster, and more accessible. So I remember when I started work, I didn't even have a computer. I didn't have a mobile phone. And there were all sorts of things that now are commonplace that we didn't, some of us started work, couldn't even have imagined. And those things, I say, are getting more accessible. So not just the size of data that you can move around, from disks to memory sticks, or the speed with which you can use that data. So bigger data, more data, and faster. And in fact, so fast that we've run out of letters in the Greek alphabet to describe the speed at which we can move data around. So having that data, storing that data, using that data, apart from the carbon footprints that it has, but we won't talk about that again today because that is also a long topic, is great, but you need to have the skills and the ability and the foresight to think about how you might use that data. The other thing that's happened is that capacity is increasing on things, and this is something we were just talking about earlier today, genome sequencing. And you think about the cost of the original gene mapping that went on, and we were just talking earlier that the first tree that was sequenced, I think it was a member of the poplar family, the first tree that was sequenced cost $30 million to sequence. And now we can do that in $1,000 in 24 hours. Not quite, but that sort of scale, which means these things that we thought were really exciting but completely inaccessible are now accessible to us all as common day tools in our armoury as researchers and developers. So we can move data around quicker, bigger, faster, and we have access to analytical tools that we didn't. And as well as that, new data sources are becoming available to us. And I've used satellite here because satellite is one of the government's 8 great technologies. A huge amount of money has been put into it, and we are world leading in terms of satellite technology. So that satellite you can see here is actually a cube satellite. It's 10 centimetres cubed, 10 by 10 by 10. And you can buy one of those for £25,000, should you want to. What you would do with it, I don't know, but you can buy one for £25,000. You can also get it up into space a lot cheaper than you would have done historically. So if you go back even to 2000, putting a pound of satellite into space was about $10,000. You can now do that for $1,000, and we think in 2025 you'll be able to do that for $100. Which means there's going to be a lot of stuff floating around up there. But if you want to then create constellations of satellites to look at different things at different times, then that is not expensive as things go in the way that it would have been 10 years ago. So all of this is creating an environment that gives us lots of opportunities. And I've used one example here because I'm passionate about the way that we protect our marine environment and the fish in it. And one of the things that I find very distressing is, despite all of this technology, still 25%, and I think that is a very conservative estimate, 25% of the fish that are caught in the world today are caught illegally by vessels that are either unlicensed or they're not registered for quotas to fish that fish in that particular area. despite all of the frameworks that exist to manage those fisheries sustainably. Also, from a business point of view, this is a big risk to our business because we are the world's biggest retailer of MSC fish. So selling sustainable fish is something that's really important to us. And therefore, we want to make sure that we're not caught out that fish being sold in our stores is caught illegally. However, if you look at the way that those certification schemes work, is that they are very much paper-based schemes. So you literally have a chain of custody that exists of bits of paper along the chain that you can trace them back and you can say, yes, so-and-so caught this, it was landed here. And as you know, you can write anything on a piece of paper. And you only have to be the people that were caught out by horse meat, just to say we weren't, but to know that that bit of paper said it was beef, but it clearly wasn't beef. But you trust a piece of paper, and clearly when your reputation is at stake, trusting a piece of paper probably isn't enough. But what we can do with the satellite catapult is to basically clash multiple data sets, and they can clash and analyse up to 60 data bases at a time, and in the space of seconds make those calculations. So when the satellite is going around the Earth and picking up pictures of boats and on all vessels, they can identify on a 15-minute basis what those vessels are, whether they're cruise ships, whether they're container vessels, whether they're refrigerated ships, whether they are fishing boats, because they can recognise them and they can clash the database that says what's that boat. And by doing that, you can tell whether a boat is in the right place at the right time doing what it's meant to be doing. And whether it has got a quota for that fish, whether it has got a quota to fish in that area, whether it's got yellow or red cards, because fishing boats get yellow and red cards. And you get a red card, then you actually shouldn't be fishing at all. And all of those things you can calculate in a nanosecond. So what we did was basically we tested it out. And I haven't got the video to show you, but I could show you literally looking at historical satellite data. So this is what you've got here is the certificate of conformance, where it was caught, all of the details. So this is line caught, that's the catching method, name of the vessel, or bar. This is in Iceland. This was cod loins from wild fish. We can then look back and see when that boat was fishing, whether it was line caught, so we can see what it was using as its fishing gear, and whether it was fishing for cod. And that, for me, is really powerful because, excuse me, I think with this technology that's available, our customers would say, Sainsbury's, why aren't you using this technology? It's available. Why are you just relying on a piece of paper? So if you were to think about all certification schemes, and I can think of whether it's MSC, FSC for timber, organic certification schemes, welfare, animal welfare schemes, no longer will it be about a piece of paper. What it will be about you proving real time that that's where your products are coming from. That's how they're being sourced, and you've got the data and the information to be able to prove that. So gone will be the days in the future of an auditor walking down a farm drive or into a factory or any of those other places. And on one day out of 365, on a Thursday afternoon, carrying out an audit that says everything is perfect here, when actually for the other 364 days things aren't perfect, but funnily enough they know the auditor's coming and when he's coming, we will have a situation where we can see real time what's going on and bring all of that information together and reassure ourselves and our customers. That is risk mitigation. You don't have to project your thoughts very far to say, how could that risk mitigation turn into competitive advantage? So, what we're calling the Internet of Things, remote sensing, satellites, data coming from all over the place to basically bring that physical real world together so that we know what's going on. So I won't go into the detail of it, but there's some really good TED Talks, if you go on put in Internet of Things, that really explain how this works and the exciting things that can be done. But there is a word of caution. This whole Internet of Things will create huge amounts of data, and some of that data will be unregulated. Who owns it? Whose data is it? What happens with that data? Where does it go? What's it being used for? Is it being used for good things or bad things? Who's going to regulate it? Who's going to manage it? So at the moment, we have got technology, remote sensing, and all of these things going on in a very unregulated and controlled world. And I think that's a rich theme to discuss perhaps later. So, moving on, resources and water is the next one that I would like to talk about. Water management is something that we feel very strongly about at Sainsbury's, and we've done a lot on it, and basically a lot in terms of simple smart metering on things like taps in our shops to urinals, leaky pipes, that's what remedial work is, sharing supply, rainwater harvesting on our stores, all sorts of other things. Basically, we have reduced our water usage by 50% from 2005 to 2012, and that continues. And I don't put that up there just to boast, and I put it up there to say, actually, that is relatively easy. That has not been a big deal for our business to achieve those kinds of savings. But literally, no pun intended, it is a drop in the ocean compared to the water that we use in producing the food that is sold in our stores. And again, it's one of those things that from a consumer point of view, we get a huge amount of dialogue, questions and customer inquiries about. And whether that's inquiries about embedded water, so that's the water that's used to grow a crop that then is moved around the world, to why are you growing roses on the lake, edge of Lake Navasha when the lake is stressed already, through all sorts of things like overfishing, runoff from the upper catchment areas, which mean the whole lake is full of fertiliser and is overgrown with water hyacinth and everything else that goes on. And I thought I would pick one of those areas that's very controversial to talk to you about. And this is Peru. And basically, Peru is the world's biggest exporter of asparagus. And 60% of the asparagus that is sold in the UK, and indeed sold in Sainsbury's, comes from Peru. And it's one thing we get lots and lots of questions about. So, this is the reality of it. Peru, long, thin country, Andes, foothills, but basically where most of the people live is the desert strip that runs along the coast. And it really is a desert strip because it technically has zero rainfall because it's in the rain shadow of the Andes. Rainfall falls on the Andes, 20% of it flows into Peru and into the Pacific Ocean, and 80% flows into the Amazon rainforest. But the Peruvian government have basically, since mid-1990s, prioritised agriculture. In fact, they are the Department of Agriculture and Irrigation. So they've spent a lot of money diverting that 20% of water off the Andes into that desert strip to support agriculture. And that means that agriculture is now over half the GDP of Peru. Unfortunately, half of that half is still in cocaine. So Peru are the biggest exporters of cocaine in the world, overtaking Colombia. And the other half is in mining activities. So they've got a lot of things going on in this country that are pretty disruptive to the environment if they're not well managed. But they are doing a lot to manage it. This bottom area is the desert area where historically, and I mean historically going back 500 or 600 years, there was a lot of forest, but that has been chopped down for firewood and all sorts of other things. But these are the areas where they are now growing asparagus. Now, you would say, well, they may want to grow their agriculture and they may have got these great irrigation plans and all those kind of things. But that was water that would have flown into the Pacific, and what are you doing to the water cycle, etc., etc., etc. But if you were to look at sustainability in the round, and this comes to the point I made earlier about trade-offs and the fact that these things aren't simple and they're complex and they're interrelated and you've got to trade off one thing and another. The reason that 60% of the asparagus that's consumed in the UK is from Peru is that it's like growing it in an outdoor glass house. And they can grow it because it's on the equator practically all throughout the entire year. And if you grow asparagus in this country, you'll be lucky to get about, well, this is averages 2.9 tonnes per hectare. That's the average. If you grow asparagus in Peru, you get 14.8 tonnes per hectare. I've never seen asparagus like it. I mean, I didn't know asparagus could grow like that. It's phenomenal. But it is like growing, say, in an outdoor glasshouse. So fundamentally, it is a good place to grow things. However, you've got the other challenges of water, of fertiliser use, of pesticide use. And again, if you juggle those things, we use less fertiliser to grow asparagus in Peru than you do in Chichester, but you use more insecticides because of the problems and the heat. You also then have the air freight versus sea freight argument. And if you add it all up, then it is still better to grow asparagus in Peru for use in the UK, but with one caveat, and I'll come back to this in a minute. And that caveat is that you sea freight it. Now you might say, well, actually this is a product that when you harvest it, it's got a pretty short life, and if you don't air freight it, by the time it gets to the UK, it's going to be in a pretty sad state. However, if you can control the temperature and the humidity and the environment that that asparagus is in the minute it is harvested and controlled, then you can take 11 days on sea to get it to the UK, and it will be in better condition than it would have been if it had been air freighted from Peru to either Miami or New York and then across to the UK. Because when it's air freighted, the temperature goes up and down all the time. You know, you pick it, you chill it, then it sits on a runway in Peru in 30 degrees of heat. Then it goes into the bottom of a plane, and depending on what else is in the cargo, and if there are animals in the cargo, then that cargo hold is kept warm. If they're not, it's chilled, so you really don't know what the conditions in that cargo hold are going to look like. It then comes off the plane in America. If it's in Miami, it's going to be a lot hotter than if it's gone to New York. It's going to go back on another plane, and then it's going to go across to the UK. And then it arrives in Chichester 3 or 4 days later, and it's in a pretty sad state. We've done some work with container ships using GPS tracking so that we can see where the containers are, so we know how long they've been on the sea, but with remote sensing inside those containers, which is looking at temperature, it's looking at humidity, it's looking at the gas mix, so we know what's happening to that crop inside that container. And that means that we know everything about that crop when it arrives, temperature, time, humidity, etc., and then we can calculate the shelf life when it arrives at Felixstowe and then gets to Chichester to be packed. That knowledge and that management, if we optimise it, we can get better shelf life, better freshness and better quality product from asparagus from Peru that's sea freighted than asparagus from Peru that's air freighted. And we have to make that work, because otherwise the whole holistic approach to something that's sustainable doesn't work. However, there's another big caveat, and I'll go back a few slides. And that's that basically what happened in Peru when they deforested everything, And this goes right back to the Spanish conquistadors who chopped down all the trees to build homes and haciendas and boats and all sorts of things, is that basically the things that grow in a climate that has no rainfall, so all that happens is there's flooding from the Andes once a year and then it doesn't rain for another 11 months. Those indigenous species disappeared. So we've been doing some work with Kew Gardens to say, how can we get back those indigenous species through the Millennium Seed Bank collection that Kew have of these indigenous species, replant those areas, because that asparagus industry won't exist if we don't have pollinators and we don't have insects and local predators, so that basically we can manage that infrastructure or ecosystem without the use of lots of agrochemicals. So basically taken that, with some R&D funding, building a new nursery to cultivate those indigenous species. Again, Kew Gardens managing this through their Millennium Seed Bank activity. That's what that area looked like in January 2008. And through that work, and not just planting up whole areas, but also creating biodiversity corridors, that was in January this year. And the reason that can happen is because it's like an outdoor greenhouse. Things grow very quickly. And some of these indigenous plants literally have 80-metre roots. It's phenomenal. And they don't need rain. They grow in that environment. So understanding the impact that you have, but also what you need from nature, those ecosystem services, is really important. So when you think about asparagus from Peru, don't just think about the fact that it's got embedded water, but think about everything else, and the fact that if they can grow more asparagus, they may grow less cocaine. Anyway, so we can waste less, we can produce more, and we can look at sustainable intensification in the round. But what about the nutritional quality of those foods? And I'm not going to talk a lot about this, but a lot of work has been done here on how you look at nutritional quality of foods. And the reason I say it's important is because a lot of the work that we've done around reducing salt intake in the UK population, reducing saturated fat, removing trans fatty acids and hydrogenated fat from the diet in the main, so we hit our targets for trans fatty acid consumption. The work that's going on fibre, and indeed the work that's going on sugar at the moment, will only go so far. So most of the health benefits that have been seen in this country in terms of the nutrition quality of the diet has been through stealth. It's been through reformulating the things that people always eat, but taking a bit of fat out, taking a bit of salt out, taking some fat out and replacing it with something else. But that road of reformulation will run out. And therefore, the only answer is the nutrition quality of primary agricultural outputs. So the nutrient quality of the chicken that we produce, the nutrient quality of the watercress that we eat. And the other point about all of that is you can't trade off one thing for another, because the health of our plants, the health of our animals, and human health are all inextricably linked. And not just health, but also safety and food safety. And you only have to look at something like the issues of antimicrobial resistance, which is a problem in plants, and resistance in plants and crops, and we've got some really big issues in crops like wheat, for example. The issues around antimicrobial resistance in animals, whether that's dairy cattle, and what that means in terms of human antimicrobial resistance. So we need to think about those things in the round, and it's great news that DEFRA have put together an animal plant health strategy, but they're working with partners like the British Nutrition Foundation to say, and how do we build that into the human health agenda? And if you look at what Public Health England have got on their agenda from a human health and nutrition point of view, and what DEFRA have got on their list, then they've got the same things. They've both got TB, because we have got the biggest pool of TB in the human population in this country in Europe. So it's a challenge for Public Health England. it's also a challenge for DEFRA and bovine TB. And the other thing really is that we can do things about that. And if you look at what's happened in the way that we produce chicken at the moment, then we can produce a chicken in 39 days. And we've got feed conversion rates that are extremely efficient. And chicken production, and therefore poultry meat, is as cost-effective as ever been, and therefore represents great value for money for customers, which is why chicken sales continue to grow, poultry consumption continues to grow, and red meat consumption continues to decline. The problem is that chicken, if you look at its fatty acid profile, isn't half as healthy as it was 30 years ago. And therefore, what are we going to do to make sure that those chickens are not just efficiently produced, but they are producing nutritious, tasty, healthy, and safe food that's accessible to everybody, whatever your budget, as well as, I say, efficiently produced. And again, you think we know about the challenges of managing things like Campylobacter in our poultry supply chain. All of those things are in the mix, and you cannot look at them in isolation. And that's what makes it, I say, so difficult. But we have the ability to be able to do that, but only with an interdisciplinary approach, interdisciplinary scientific approach. We need the big data analysts as well as the scientists who know all there is to know about genomics or molecular biology, but we also need the end-to-end value chain. So we as a retailer looking after our customers need to be pulling on the scientific community to say these are the kind of things that we want, but we can't do that unless we have the skills and capacity throughout that end-to-end value chain. So from the great scientists that you've got here, the people we work with at Vitacrest, and us wanting to do the best that we can for our customers. And that leads me on to the last thing that I want to talk about, which is the new bioeconomy. So this is the thing that everyone's talking about because it has all the answers to everything, which is a gross exaggeration. However, the thing about the new bioeconomy comes from the fact that necessity is the mother of all invention. So if you think about what we've got to do around the challenges around sustainable intensification and having a positive impact on our environment, then what does that look like? So the government and people working on this across all of the industrial sectors have come up with a working definition. So if you look at it from a government point of view, the government would say not only is this a necessity, but actually from an economic growth point of view for the UK to be able to develop those skills and to be able to export them and to create jobs, this is a priority. So this is something that actually from a cross-party point of view, everyone is supportive of because they can see the economic growth that could come from this and the job creation that could come from this. But this is about essentially saying all bio-based activity, products, processes which contribute to sustainable and resource-efficient solutions to the challenges that we face fall under this huge umbrella called the bioeconomy. And that can be food, which is my area, but also the production of chemicals, materials, energy production, so things like land use policy and how that fits into, do we put solar panels on it, do we grow crops on it, or do we grow crops for energy on it? All of those debates all fit into this with the ultimate output of saying, how do we look after our environment and the people in it properly? So what do we mean? Well, we mean on the left-hand side here, the three parts of sustainability, so economic sustainability and all that goes with that, product diversity and new feedstocks, so how do we feed those systems and processes, obviously jobs and growth, some of the societal grand challenges, so feeding a 10 billion population, using those resources efficiency, the scientific opportunity that goes with that, and the one that I touched on earlier when I was talking about big data, which is this effective stewardship. So who's going to control all of this? Who's going to write the rules? Who's going to make sure these things don't move faster than we can legislate and regulate for them? So that's the bioeconomy. There are some big enablers that need to happen for all of this. Some of them are happening faster than others. but they all need to happen. So first and foremost, we need engagement, and we need engagement from consumers, because at the moment, whilst our customers love their iPhone 6 or their Mac workbook or their Apple iPad or whatever it is, and they have technology everywhere and they use it and they love it, when it comes to the food they eat, somehow they don't love it anymore. And we have an obligation as a scientific community and community that is involved in developing science and bringing science and technology to market, particularly around food, to engage consumers in a way that we have never engaged them before. So they get as excited about this as they do about their new mobile phone. There is a piece around global reach, because there's no good us having all of this and it only being applied to the UK market. So the opportunity to outreach and use our world-beating research expertise to export our knowledge and know-how. Knowledge exchange therefore becomes fundamental, and I talked about the data haves and have-nots, but that gets even bigger when you think about people who have access to all of this. It needs funding. There's lots of EU funding, but not necessarily coming our way. So how do we get our fair share of what is available in the EU? Because other people who don't have our track record bat way above their weight. How do we develop the skills in our young people that want to study science and technology to make sure that we have got the skills to take that research and apply it? We need sectors that are ready to embrace that technology, whether that's the food sector or the energy sector. The policy frameworks that I've talked about, EU support, and the analysts to be able to do it. So some big things that need to all come together to make this a reality. And then if you look at it, you've got, I suppose, two parts to it really. We have got the requirement to have environmental sustainability, to have economic sustainability, and to have ethical and fair society, so social sustainability. Those three pillars. Those things require a transformation in the way that we do things. So it is no longer, we're no longer able to face up to those grand challenges that we face in terms of that triple bottom line of sustainability if we don't literally game change the way that we do things. Iterative is not going to work. And whether that's product diversity, so what we look at and what we think of in terms of energy, food, chemicals and materials, there will be products that we just we can't even imagine today in tomorrow's world. And just the start of that with materials becoming available, so the first graphene light bulb, for example. And you think LED, some people are still getting to grips with that. Well, that will have moved on in 10 years' time easily. Systems and processes, and these are where the biological systems come in, and things like new feedstocks. So, for example, there's some work going on at Nottingham University at the moment that's taking carbon monoxide as a waste gas from industrial processes and turning that into green energy. And all sorts of interesting biological processes using new feedstocks to create new sources of energy. And that's not just anaerobic digestion and whether farmers should all introduce it, because every farmer I see has built an anaerobic digester, but he's not quite sure what he's going to put in it. And then he realises that he's got lots of chicken waste that's great, but he's got to grow sugar beet to put in his anaerobic digester to get the meal right. And you stand there and you think, well, is it right to grow sugar beets to put in an anaerobic digester to create energy? And you say to him, is that worthwhile? And he says, well, it is while the feed-in tariffs work, but if the feed-in tariffs disappear, then I'm not sure I'm going to make any money. And by the way, that anaerobic digester cost me $2.5 million. And those kind of things are going to be, I suppose, debated at length over the coming few years, because the agenda is so complex and the science is evolving so rapidly. But if you watch this space, those kind of things are going to be appearing almost on a daily basis, because there's a huge amount going on. But to say all of that needs effective stewardship. So who is going to write the land use policy that says it is better to grow crops for food in that instance than it is to grow crops for energy or fuel. So I've picked a few of these to sort of bring it alive. The first one is the work that's going on making plants a bit more efficient when it comes to using solar energy. So in terms of growth, actually, the increased levels of carbon dioxide have been helpful to a point. And you say, how can that possibly be? But actually, that increasing levels of carbon dioxide have coincided with a greening of the planet. So actually, the planet is greener than it was. But that has now slowed off because plants have come to their capacity in their ability to uptake CO2. And that's for all sorts of complicated reasons, regulatory pathways in the plant that say, actually, I've got enough sugar, so I'm going to shut down photosynthesis now, or actually, I can't store any more sugar, so I'm going to cut down photosynthesis now. But the bottom line is that probably only 5% of solar energy is converted by plants. So if you could find a way of getting 5% to 10%, then that extra CO2 can be used by those plants, they can store it, they can utilise it. Those extra plants can help us manage water more efficiently and contribute to biodiversity and soil health. And if those plants are crops that are used for food, then we can use that increased productivity, increased yield in a sustainable way to feed the nearly 1 billion people on the planet at the moment that are undernourished, and get us some way to feeding the 10 billion that we're going to have to feed in the future. So, the green revolution, imagine what that could do. I talked about plant health and animal health. This is one that we got away with last time, and some of you may know or not know. Blue tongue virus is basically becoming an epidemic. It was something that really wasn't endemic to Europe and not to the UK. And it's common in places like India, where up to 30% of animals can be infected and die from this. And basically, as climate change, things warm, this is basically transmitted by midges. Those midges have come to Europe and they came to the UK. In fact, they came all the way across the UK, from Scotland to the south of England. And you can vaccinate against blue tongue virus. It affects sheep and cattle and makes them very poorly, and in 10% of cases they die. But also you have to cull those animals as well, because you don't want it to spread. But if you vaccinate, then basically that is very expensive and it's not the most effective way. And as we know, we don't want to vaccinate for everything because of all the things we know around the use of agrochemicals and use of too many agrochemicals. And our customers don't like it. So Pirbright did some work to model and basically look at populations of those midges, and to basically say, we'll only vaccinate in those areas where we know that the midges are present and we know that there is likelihood of an outbreak. And they managed that through great data analysis and great surveillance really quickly. And the view is that basically, when they controlled that and got that blue tongue outbreak under control, the impact, had they not, would have been about £500 million. And we all know what happens, whether it's foot and mouth or anything else, when we get those kinds of outbreaks that are uncontrollable. The cost is enormous. And not just the cost in terms of culling those animals, the livelihoods, the compensation, but some of those farmers come out of farming that particular livestock because it's too difficult, it's been too traumatic, and rebuilding that capacity in the UK is huge. Interestingly, I was talking to Pirbright last week about this, and they've done even more work now, which they're trying to identify the genome sequence of these midges, because only 10% of them actually can act as a vector for the disease. So it's not all midges, it's only 10% of them, but you've got to know which 10% they are. So that's the work they're doing at the moment, to really target that intervention. This one's a really controversial one. It's been in the papers recently. There was a bit of a hoo-ha about it. But this is about dengue fever and mosquitoes. And you might have read in the papers about these genetically modified mosquitoes being sent to Miami for a trial. And basically what this is saying is that these mosquitoes and dengue fever, if you go back to 1970, was endemic in about 7 countries. Again, the spread of the mosquitoes means that it's now prevalent in 128 countries. A huge increase over the last 50 years. And this is a pretty awful disease for which there is no medication. And again, ends up with fatalities. And these also aren't endemic mosquitoes, so these are mosquitoes that have spread but aren't indigenous, and therefore they can be separated out on the basis of their genetics. And so what they've done in Oxford, with the University of Oxford working with a company called Oxitec, have basically come up with a male mosquito that they put into the population and mates with the females. They then die, but their offspring can't reproduce. And basically that kills out that particular mosquito. Well, the other thing I should add is these mosquitoes bite during the day, not just at night. So mosquito nets don't work with them because they just don't, basically they're around all the time. So the bad news is people get upset about the idea that we have modified this mosquito. The good news is that it dies out, so those genetics don't persist in the environment. And that's theoretical. We're doing lots of work, or they're doing lots of work to measure whether those are persisting, and they are actually, offspring are dying out. And the reason they can do that is that they basically put a fluorescent marker into that genome sequence to see whether that DNA is being passed on. So there's some really good, sensible, fail-safe factors being built into this. But this is the kind of thing that from a public perception point of view, people are not happy about. And I suppose the question is, when dengue fever comes to the UK and we've got those kind of mosquitoes, will we feel any different about it? Because at the moment, it's not a problem for most people. This is a synthetic biology example, and basically talking about the development of flu vaccines that is basically a continual process, because we know the flu virus mutates all the time. I didn't realise this, but when we looked at this, that there are 3 to 5 million severe cases of flu annually, can't say that, and 500,000 deaths every year from pandemic flu outbreaks. And basically, this is using plants to manufacture vaccines, because the way that it's done at the moment is very inefficient and basically looks at old-fashioned methods of producing vaccine, which is slow, needs scaling up, and cannot cope with the scale of what's required. And that's just one of many things. And if some of you will know that the Ebola vaccine that they were looking at was grown in tobacco plants. So this is already happening. And I suppose that's the last thing that I wanted to say, really, is that I suppose I've hoped to have illustrated to you that if you look at all of these things around the emerging challenges, a lot of the answers are already here. So there's that lovely saying that the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. And our job is to say, let's find out where it is distributed, create those connections, that connectivity across value chains, across the scientific disciplines, so that we can share our knowledge and know-how and bring all of those things that are already happening somewhere together in a different way that means that we can face up to the grand challenges that we face now, today. And I think we can do that, and I'm very optimistic that science and technology has the answers, but it does mean that we have to work together a little bit differently. So I hope I've provoked some questions and thoughts, perhaps not, but thank you for listening, and thank you again for inviting me to share my thoughts today. Thank you.
Judith. Now there is time for some questions. We have some microphones, I think. Yes, we have a microphone. Could I ask just to say who you are when you ask your questions? You have one here and then one at the back.
Hello, I'm Hazel Inskip, Professor of Statistical Epidemiology at the University here. That was a great talk, thank you very much, and a very optimistic one and very inspiring. You talked about uneven distribution at the end, and I think you were talking about technologies and what's available, but the uneven distribution of food is a major problem.
Yes.
And there's an elephant in the room today, which you didn't mention, and I use that term deliberately, and that's the obesity epidemic that we face in, in this part of the world, with more than half of high-income country people eating more than they need to eat, and many low and middle-income countries as well. And I wondered what your comment was like, because obviously Sainsbury wants to sell more food and produce more, you know, raise income that way. But actually, one of our great challenges is to cut consumption.
Yeah.
And you've talked about dietary quality, but it's more than that. It's about actual amounts as well.
Yeah. And I think obesity is multifactorial. So there are so many issues around obesity. Lots of them obviously are around the food that we eat and the quality of the food that we eat, but also around calories in, calories out, and also about the environment in which we work. So the fact that children are brought up in much more sedentary lifestyles, sitting in front of computer games and doing all the things that we didn't do when we were younger. And I wouldn't want to be quoted on this, just for clarity, but I would be in the position that says the only way that you create a real even playing field on these things is to legislate for them and create the regulatory environment. So if you look at what happened with smoking cessation, drink driving, all of those kind of things, they happened when some quite game-changing legislation came in to literally change the landscape. So that would be my first port of call, because we've all signed up to voluntary agreements that the government set to reduce salt, to reduce this, to do this, to reduce portion sizes. We all get beaten to death about the amount of sugar in foods, and we'll do all of those things, but it won't change anything. Because the world and his wife have known for a day, or forever rather, that they should eat 5 a day, fruit and veg, and they don't. And it's that statistic is just not moving. And if it is actually moving slightly, it's in the people that don't need to eat more fruit and veg. So the people that are doing all the good things are doing more of the good things, and the people that aren't doing the good things aren't doing them at all. And when they are, they're actually eating more fruit, which is full of sugar and all those kind of things. So I think creating that environment. I think the other thing is just education. And I know Jamie Oliver's banged on about this forever, but that people don't appreciate food, where it comes from. You see those horrific stories about children not knowing that crisps come from potatoes and they grow in the ground and all those kind of things. But being able to feed yourself and your family healthy, nutritious food is a life skill. And it needs to be taught at school, and it needs to be taken through life. And whether that's the education part of learning about food and nutrition and health, and also being able to cook. And we've got a missed generation. So not only have we got our children today that don't know those things, but their parents don't either. And therefore, that work that needs to go on at 2 levels, both in schools, but also with young adults. And then the other thing is, I think that, and apart from Jamie Oliver's celebrities, they sort of shy away from these things, but we need a few ambassadors who are really going to take this agenda on and make it their thing. And not that I'm just talking about Jeremy Clarkson, but you know, what he has managed to evoke in the papers and through the British public and over the last couple of weeks is nothing short of a miracle, because there are so many more important things in the world to worry about, yet everyone's worried about Jeremy Clarkson. I mean, if Jeremy Clarkson suddenly decided he didn't want to smoke and drink and eat too much and take on a healthy lifestyle, then that would be quite an interesting approach. But I suppose the answer is it's going to require a lot of things, but I would be, personally, I think that we have to create that environment in a regulatory sense, so something big has to happen. Because it's not going to happen by us just reducing the sugar in our soft drinks.
Okay, there's one at the back.
Hello, I'm Denise Baden from the business school. You raised a real sense of urgency about food and food waste at the beginning, and you know, lots of really interesting technical solutions. But the simple, obvious solution, which can be done with no technology at all, is to address the marketing policy. Now, Sainsbury's is one of the worst, I think, for these 2-for-1 offers 3 for 2 and 4 for 3 now. And all it can do is create waste. I was wondering if you had a word for the marketing department.
Well, actually, you raise a good point, because we have a thing at Sainsbury called value simplicity, which is basically customers don't understand all those deals. So stop giving them deals and give them everyday low prices. So you won't find buy one get one free in our stores anymore. We're moving away from 2-fers, 3-fers, multi-buys as they're called, and moving into total price reduction. But the reality is that we are selling less food as a country than we were years ago. So in fact, household waste has come down 15% in the last 5 years, whilst the number of households in the UK has grown by 4%. So we are getting there, and you can see that volume has gone out of the market. So people are buying less, and they have literally, what I would say, during the recession, dialed out waste from their shopping basket. So all the things that they were buying on their weekly shop and putting in the bin the following week because it's gone out of life, they're not doing anymore. So weekly shops are a thing of the past, so the number of people shopping in supermarkets has gone down, the volume they're buying has gone down, the number of people shopping in convenience stores and small local stores and buying several small shops a week is growing. So actually we're pushing on a natural consumer trend. So we should feel optimistic about that. I do think there's more we can do. So if you look at things like used by, best before dates, freezer summaries, customers really don't understand the difference between a used by date, which is about food safety, and is a legal requirement for us to tell people when to eat cooked meats and when they should dispose of things, to things like best before dates, which are simply a recommendation. And again, customers don't understand the difference between food spoilage organisms that make your bread go mouldy, or mould grows on your cheese and jam, but if you don't mind that, you can scrape it off and still eat it, versus something that actually will make you very ill. So I think we've got a job to do in terms of educating customers about how to make the most of their food. Because if you look at what ends up, and we do a lot of work with RAP, who are part of DEFRA, who are the Waste Resource Actions Project, who rummage through people's rubbish bins, looking at what they've thrown out. A lot of people throw out food that is perfectly okay to eat. So there is a lot more we can do, but be assured that people are wasting less food. And that's not me saying that, as official data. And we are selling less, so.
I've done a piece from Volatility. You said we a lot in all of that, and this kind of follows on from that. Then, as a retailer, do you see it as your role to be that educator and to edit people's choices? So I know that Sainsbury's were one of the first to cut out unsustainable palm oil from your own products. Do you see yourself as, therefore, someone who's going to be that educator and who's going to lead the way and say, we'll only sell you the healthy product, the sustainable product, or will you stop everything and let them make their own choice?
A bit of both, I'd say. So there are some things that we wouldn't edit people's choices on, because we think they are not our job to do that, because we would see ourselves as apolitical, and the fact that we don't get involved in moral issues. Things that are clearly unsafe, illegal, or probably not a good idea to do, we definitely don't do. We have very strong policies. So, for example, we don't sell puffer fish, because that's a pretty unsafe thing to sell. But we do make decisions on things that customers don't find acceptable, and nor do we. So we don't sell foie gras, for example. If there was a high animal welfare foie gras product available, which I think there is probably in Spain, where those ducks aren't force-fed, then geese aren't force-fed, then potentially we would. So I think there's a whole spectrum of things where we operate those decisions. We do a lot of stuff though in the background to do things that customers aren't really interested in. So they're not interested in until they go wrong. So things like DNA testing for horse meat and all sorts of other speciation, isotope testing to look where products come from. So when something says it's British, we know it's British because the isotope testing tells us it's British and not Scottish or German. And we do lots of testing on nutritional quality and microbiological quality, etc., etc. And we don't tell anyone about that. We just do it in the hope, and a bit like palm oil actually. We were removing palm oil from, or unsustainable palm oil from products long before the orangutans climbed up the front of the Unilever building. They weren't real orangutans, they were people dressed up as orangutans climbing up the front of the Unilever building, because you kind of know those things aren't right, but customers aren't interested in them. But when they do find out and they are interested in them, they are reassured that you've done the right thing in the background. So, and horse meat was one of those things.
Okay, I think we've got now 2 hands, probably the time. There's certainly a question here, gentleman there. I think there was 2 people here and one over.
I'll try and be quicker.
Yeah,
sorry.
so we've got 4, that's it. So, gentleman here first.
Judith, thank you very much indeed for that fascinating presentation, and you paint a very optimistic view on science and research, and I'm with you on that. I suppose if I can just make a comment and then ask a question. My comment on that is that there's a huge gulf, isn't there, between research and knowledge and practice, and we've got to do something about bringing those two together. If you look at the British countryside, it's in a very poor state in terms of its biodiversity, in terms of its historic environment, in terms of its distinctiveness, pollution of groundwater, aquifers and rivers. These are real issues right on our doorstep. My question, and is linked, I'm afraid, to the elections, and that is, you hinted that there was a need for public intervention to resolve the conflicts in land use, the competing interests. So I think I'm right with these statistics. We've got about 60,000 hectares growing biodiesel and bioethanol at the moment. Who knows what the growing figure is on photovoltaics. We have a biomass target in terms of renewable energy of whatever it is, 5%, and I don't know how close we are to all those things. We now have resilience in terms of climatic change. And there are a huge number of competing interests on land use. But we do not have a coherent policy. We've got a plethora of agencies, both at central government and local government, all intervening, but there's no clear vision. And so are you, as Sainsbury, going to be saying to this new government, whichever new government we have, and it's going to be a weakened one, I suspect, that there is a need for a review of rural land use and a clear vision as to where society wants to go with that?
I think, as I said just now, we're kind of an apolitical organisation. So officially we won't. Personally, I will be, because I do think there is a requirement, and so do most people think there is a requirement for a coherent land use policy, and we don't have one. The National Council for Universities and Business just, I think about 3 or 4 weeks ago, published their Food Economy Task Force findings, which our ex-chief executive was one of the chairs of that task force. And one of the 3 big recommendations they made was for effective land use policy from a government point of view. I think that's available on the NCUB website, so it's all in there. But I agree, we cannot allow land to be used in a way, and it even comes down to things, and I would say this because I'm an ambassador for the Woodland Trust, but if you think about the latest things in the papers this week about 500 ancient woodlands, And if you think of the biodiversity that an ancient oak tree will support, it's something like 1,000 species. You think about what trees do in terms of carbon, soil health, water management, all of those kind of things. The idea that we would lose that ancient woodland that cannot be replaced just seems ridiculous. So, but that's me speaking personally.
Okay. There's one here.
Judith Batchelar, project coordinator at the university. First of all, thanks for the interesting talk. It was interesting to think that everything, science and research can work together with business and enterprise. I just have a question. When you spoke about the work monitoring suppliers, including fishing,
Yes.
and you were talking about using satellite imaging and things like that, how do you actually present that to your suppliers in sort of palatable form that you don't feel like they're not trusted? So I'm just interested in how you actually present that.
That's a really good question. We have two things that we do. One is we have policies which our suppliers sign up to, so it's part of our terms and conditions, and they sign up to those policies, and those policies are relevant to the sector that they work in. So it might be animal health, it might be use of sustainable raw materials, whatever it might be. And then we have another thing called a surveillance programme. So that is our risk assessment programme, and we spend millions of pounds a year on surveillance, basically, and that will be anything from DNA testing of meat to looking at fishery management and vessels, and that is risk assessed. So basically we will look at areas where, so we know, for example, tuna fishing, Indian Ocean, big problem. So we're sourcing tuna from the Indian Ocean. It should in theory be pole and line. We know the vessels, we know that we can look at that because it's an area of high risk. Unless we find something adverse, we don't share it with our suppliers. However, one of the things we're looking at, and this is the whole big data piece, is the amount of data we're amassing that has not adverse tests or adverse checks in place, but is variations on a theme of a green tick, or a tick in a box and a green light, gives us some very valuable data that we could share anonymously with our suppliers, that would give them information on yields, it would give them information on allergen management, it would give them information on productivity and yields from certain growers, the quality of extra virgin olive oil from Italy. So one of the things is that rather than using the adverse tests to give the bad news to the suppliers, is say, well, actually we can share this insight with you, and that data is hugely valuable. And I suppose it brings on the back of horse meat, where basically the Food Standards Agency, working with Professor Elliott on the outcome of that horse meat scandal, is to say how can we create that intelligence anonymously for the industry that means that everyone can share in that management of risk. So
There's one just behind, and then one final one.
I'm Louise Manning from the Royal Agricultural University. Much of the technology that you've described can now identify crime and economically motivated adulteration in the food supply chain when it never before can it be done. Whilst many companies that have shareholders have food crime in their risk registers, do you think the wider supply chain has woken up to the risks that all those individual businesses face?
yes, but quite slowly. So I think a lot of these things, if you think about a lot of food businesses, and I would include farmers amongst those, they are SMEs. And as such, they don't have the infrastructure that a company like ours would have, or the resources. And a lot of those businesses are kind of family and friends businesses, so they don't necessarily have expertise in those things. So one of the things that we are working at is to try and understand how we share not just the knowledge, but the ability to use that knowledge and to interpret it in the right way. Because, as I say, a lot of the businesses that we deal with as you go down the supply chain just won't have that infrastructure, skills, capability to be able to do it for themselves. So we have to facilitate it on their behalf. And that goes all the way. So, for example, one of the things that we're working on at the moment is apprenticeship schemes. And apprenticeship schemes both in primary agriculture and in food manufacturing, because again, a lot of people in that value chain don't have the critical mass or even an HR director to put those apprenticeship schemes together to build those skills. So I think our job is actually to facilitate on behalf of the value chain where they can't facilitate it themselves, all of those kind of things, including that sharing of knowledge and giving people the skills to interpret that data.
My name's Annie Wright from the Psychology Department of Southampton. I'm particularly interested in human interactions, and it kind of flows into some of the stuff you were talking about. I think it was a really interesting talk, and I was very interested again to bring it back full circle to the whole issue of waste and the consumer issue as well as the
resource
supply,
issue,
which I can see where the technology is coming in. It was just interesting because it felt to me a little bit like you were underestimating the consumer. You said something along the lines of when the consumer finds out, then they become interested. And I was thinking, you know, if you say that in the USA and in the UK, where we're using, in terms of our population, vast quantities of food, the obesity epidemic, etc., etc., then would it be a reasonable thing to ask something like Sainsbury's to be more educational? So if, for example, you had, this is how much it costs in terms of energy, that nice slide you had, to produce a loaf of bread, slapped somewhere near the Sainsbury bakery bit, then actually it wouldn't just be the converted who turn up to these meetings, you would have a lot more converted who then would be going, wow, I never knew that, I might reduce how much I throw away.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point. Which have done a whole piece of work with what they call their consumer juries. So they, across the country, got panels of people together to explore how interested people are in some of these issues, because we assume that most customers aren't interested. There is a significant minority, and I say significant because they're quite vocal, but if you look at the whole vast 25 million people who shop with us every week, it is in the hundreds the people that contact us to talk about those things and who want a dialogue on those topics. And we enter into that dialogue because actually we learn a lot from it as well. So anyway, which have done this consumer jury piece. And what came out of that is the fact that people are far more interested in these kind of things than you would ever think possible. And actually they do want to know about why asparagus from Peru may be a good thing or not a good thing, and what's actually the argument in the round. And they love watching television programmes on it and engaging in it. But almost we dumb it down, and I'm talking about industry now, dumb down some of those challenges. So another piece of work has just been finished by the Government Office for Science on how to engage basically consumers in the round in some of these debates in a more meaningful way without dumbing down the agenda. And that piece of work basically presented to a group of consumers some of these kind of things, not these arguments, but similar kinds of things. So talking about the challenges on the equal distribution of food, obesity and health, you know, what factory farming means and what it doesn't mean, all those kind of things. And then they left them for a week to think about it, and then they got them back a week later and asked them to talk about it. And the basic bottom line is that all of those people went home and couldn't believe what they'd heard, were so engaged in the topic about their food, where it comes from, some of the future challenges, talked to all their family and friends, and spent the entire week formulating their own ideas and opinions on it, and then came back a week later and literally dumped all of it. That report is about to be produced by the Government Office for Science, but will form the basis of engaging people in the entire debate. And I think everyone has a role to play in that. I think the scientists have a role to play in it, the retailers do, the manufacturers and processors. So, I mean, I could talk about it forever. I think it's the most fascinating subject, but I'm also aware that it isn't a fascinating subject for everyone. So, I agree.
Great teachers, we have to make all unfascinating subjects.
Okay, I'd like to invite Lady Wakeham, who's patron of the Asparagus Conservation Trust, to give our vote of thanks for this evening.
Sorry, Judith on my right. Can I, on behalf of the Conservation Trust, thank you most warmly for your hospitality to the whole university and for your generosity of time, effort. Francis for doing it all on the ground. It's been marvellous. Judith on my left. That was fantastic. But 42 years ago, I went to work for Margaret Thatcher, rather randomly, and she said through the whole of her time in politics, any thank you can be written on a postage stamp. Now, I started to make my notes, but after 5 minutes you had said so much that was so interesting, and I think the questions say it all. But I can only say one thing, which is thank you on behalf of all of us for the most interesting thing. Really fantastic facts. We will all go away with a lot to think about. I am one of your 25 million. Please don't stop the offers.
Thank you. Thank you.